Hello, everyone. On behalf of the DK-UK Association and the Finnish British Chamber of Commerce, my name is Sophie. I will be your moderator today, and I'm delighted to bid everyone welcome for the event, Reigniting Your Business After Lockdown. Just before we start the event, I myself am a part of the Young Professionals, an arm of the DK-UK associations, where young professionals to the age of 36 across Denmark and UK hold multiple networking events socially and professionally, thus bridging the gap across the pond. Day to day, I'm specializing in international affairs and cybersecurity, and I have the pleasure of acting a moderator and being a part of the YP and DK-UK for the past 2 years. So as we mentioned, today's topic is reigniting your business after lockdown, and we are thrilled to have with us two experts on the topic, Jan and Jacqui. Jan himself is an award-winning business coach, change management consultant, and a non-executive director. He is the managing director of Quiver Management, where he works with coaches, trainers, and consultants of medium and large enterprises across the UK, where they help businesses and leaders. Previously, he's acted as a CEO of international businesses based in the US and the European Union within change consultancy. And he's Danish, and he's based in the southwest of England. So welcome to you, Jan. We also have Jacqui Brown with us from Goodwill. She is a HR manager, and they provide high quality and compliant HR advice across all the spectrum of anything HR for a portfolio of their clients within Goodwill. She supports the employee side with the fulfillment of the life cycle in the UK, giving employers also pragmatic advice on technical matters, HR issues, including employee relations, design of organizations, policy, procedures, implementations, contract, and so on. So she is the one from the employee side knowing how to navigate reigniting your business as well. So a very warm welcome to both of you, Jan and Jacqui.
Thank you.
Great. I'm very much looking forward to diving into the topic today and the audience. As you may have noticed in the chat or in this webinar, it will be recorded. Please keep cameras and audio off as the webinar is going on. Do feel free to share any questions you have in the chat. We will cover 4 topics today: the business environment of today, how to practically reignite your business, how to motivate yourself as a leader through this change, and how to motivate your teams and staff. We also have the opportunity, if time allows, to discuss these questions throughout the event. And at the end, we will have a Q&A where we can dive more specifically into audience questions as well. So without further ado, I will start with the questioning here in our hot seat for today. Looking at the business environment, you are both, as business coaches, experts, and consultants in this area. You're faced with a number of businesses who are looking at reigniting their businesses today. So Jan, I would love to start by asking you a question. What are you seeing is happening as businesses prepare to re-emerge from the pandemic today?
Well, thanks, Sophie. I would say it's probably a really mixed picture that we're seeing today. So we're seeing some business, of course, through the pandemic has actually thrived. We know, of course, some of the transport, logistics, Amazon and those are thriving businesses and actually done better than probably could be expected. But then we have a lot of business who's struggling to some level. I call it sort of almost been in a coma because they're just about kept the lights on, if that. And I see sort of almost the two ones. You have one is I would call the hibernating one. So they're sort of ready to jump back up again after a long pause. And then you got almost the zombies is another word that we are probably questioning whether they will survive because of some of maybe the debt level they'll have to build up and whether the market has actually shifted away from them during this pandemic. So really mixed picture. And this goes across a number of different industries. So yeah, very mixed bag.
Great. So on that note, a few follow-up questions come to my mind. Which businesses are hibernating and which ones are the zombies?
Yeah, so the hibernating one would be things like the airlines, which has had a little bit of flying, some of the transport. Look at the trains. They were down at something like less than 10% of their normal pax, so the number of passengers going through the airports for a while. 10%, imagine that, and you still actually got the whole infrastructure to maintain still within the airport. So big challenge in those in terms of the hibernation state. But of course, they're now facing into potentially really rapid resurgence in particularly in the tourism probably. Whether business will come back, I think is a question mark, but pace business, people will start to travel again. There might be a pent-up demand. So a lot of uncertainties in these, and the international, of course, situation doesn't help. We don't know where we can travel. So that's probably the hibernating one. Zombies, it's interesting, I was speaking to a local council not long ago and she feared for a number of the high street retail shops who had been supported through this period with business rate relief and furloughing of staff, but actually whether really viable in reality coming out of this, and did the owners actually want to start, or had they sort of given up? They were just keeping the lights on for staff and themselves, but they might turn the key in reality after this.
Yeah, very interesting point. And Jacqui, over to you. Now that we are discussing a little bit what challenges this is also bringing to the businesses, can you please give your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think I did just want to add on to Jan's point before as well about the retail side of the business as well. You know, customers are, the whole habits that they have about shopping is changing, and I think it has been for a while anyway. But maybe the pandemic has accelerated the fact that shopping habits are moving more online. We've heard about the death of the high street for quite a while now, and maybe this is just making it all sort of, you know, that much more prevalent. And I think if we think about office environments, my perspective in how business is changing is that, of course, we're having to become more flexible. Everything's moving online, irrespective of retail. Even in the office environment, you know, we're doing more flexible working. We're communicating on Zoom and Teams. We're doing events like we are today, and I think this is here to stay. But in terms of the actual business, lack of face-to-face interaction is going to be a huge problem. In terms of there's that fear of damage to company culture. So businesses really need to give some thought as to how they're going to keep their employees engaged. There needs to be a lot of forward planning as well. So what about those employees who don't want to work from home? Maybe their home environment isn't suited to it, or maybe they've had you know, issues with mental health being affected by home working. So as an employer, you've got a duty of care to really address that and to think about how you're going to work around that. And there's also, for those businesses who maybe haven't been that tech savvy in the past, they've been forced into a situation over the pandemic to try and, you know, come into the 21st century. There is the cost of implementing those solutions as a workable solution. You know, I guess that's all part and parcel of future-proofing your business, arguably. And then, of course, there's the trust aspect. When your employees are home working, are they actually doing work? Are you going to turn them into this monster of a micromanager? Or, you know, are you going to be able to put some mechanisms in place where you can monitor that and actually empower your employees to work from home? So I guess they'd be my main points.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And actually, just a research came out from the United States a couple of days ago that showed that when employees were asked whether they would work from home versus taking a $30,000 bonus, they would prefer to work from home. So if incentives such as bonuses don't work, it's very interesting to see what else can businesses do to rethink these major changes. Would any of you like to give your 2 cents on this? Maybe Jen?
Well, that's a surprise, that one with maybe the result isn't surprising from the US survey, but actually I have none of the business you work with have even considered starting to give them money to come in versus working from home. I think they're much more looking at how do we adapt so we can allow both. And there will be a long transition. That was really an interesting conversation that I didn't have, but I saw amongst clients, senior managers, how some of them were themselves, and this is now talking about the senior team, looking at actually they didn't want to go back for probably the rest of the year, even though the rest of the team were talking about it because they were concerned about their health. They had vulnerable dependents as well. So we will probably be looking at a long transition before we start to see people truly being back. And then the challenge becomes, what flexibility do you put in? Do you ask people to all come in on a Tuesday because we want the team spirit to build that day? Or do you say, come in when you want? There are some real big questions here to figure out. And add to that, of course, not everybody's working in the office. So how do you combine that with a site where there are people coming in to do work that requires them to be on site? How is that balanced?
Yes, that is a very, very interesting point as well. Jacqui, do you have anything that you would like to add here?
No, I think Jan's pretty much covered all of the points that I had to think of.
Oh, sorry, Jacqui.
No, but I think it's a really a good point. I think one of the thoughts or questions, follow-on questions that come to my mind is Jan, you mentioned remote working here, and of course this is something we can dive into a little bit later. But what about the challenges, and maybe you, Jacqui, can see that from an HR point of view. What about the challenges when people are working across the world suddenly, the legal challenges as well that revolve around this, taxes and so on?
Yeah. I mean, I think I did touch on one of my previous answers. I did talk about the challenges that businesses are experiencing around home working. But if we're thinking purely on the logistics side, how can we do this safely from a business perspective? Then, of course, you need to think about, does this constitute a secondment? Do people have the right to work? Because, of course, not only have we had the pandemic, we've had lovely Brexit.
Jacqui, I think we lost you there for a short moment. Now we have you back.
Sorry, I think it's my internet there. I'm not too sure where you heard up until, right. But yeah. So of course, Teams cut out at that point. No one wants to hear that word anymore. Yeah. So if you think about Brexit, how that's and the pandemic and how that has affected remote working, maybe how people want to work nowadays. We also have to make sure that people do have the right to work. That's fundamentally if they want to work anywhere within Europe or the UK. If they're a European, then that's what we need to think about. But then also if we think about how long someone's spending in any one place, there is also the taxation implications. So it's really important that you partner with good tax experts in all of the locations that maybe your employees are expressing that they would like to work. Also, I suppose in terms of actually making sure that you're keeping your employees engaged, irrespective of whether they actually have the taxation and the right to work piece ironed out. I guess when we're all working together in the UK or we're all working together overseas, there's not that much difference in it. I think ultimately it just takes a good team leader who is trained in knowing how to communicate, who has good emotional intelligence, who is able to actually give their employees the reason why their role is so important. I think that will allow businesses to overcome a lot of those challenges when they're not physically able to see their employees so often.
Yeah, that's a great point. So at this point,
could I add something to that one, Sophie? Because actually, looking at it from another angle, I actually think we've seen a big step up in, it's an opportunity in reality, and leaders have now had to get used to working with teams remotely. We are seeing, I think, a good leveling in some respects of these scenarios where you had a head office in the UK and lots of staff spread around, where the staff in the other countries probably felt they were far away from the central point where all the decisions were made. That leveling of playing field, I think, has been really healthy. And we've seen a shift in, for example, leadership training, where before they will have to travel from India and America and stuff to come to somewhere in the UK, maybe an offsite somewhere for some training, and they will be sheep dipped for a few days and sent back. Yeah. Now we can start to do very different things where they get a couple of hours a week because they're all remote. They can dial in for a short period of time, or once a month they get a little bit, and it can be across the whole leadership community in very large organizations. There's actually great opportunities for leaders to interact probably more effectively with teams that are spread around the world. So opportunities there as well, in my mind.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very positive note to kind of wrap up this first question. As you say, there are a lot of challenges, but there's also a lot of opportunities here to rise to. So with that said, we shall move on to question number 2. How, when we look at reigniting your businesses, how can business leaders reignite and reposition the business to a changed world? Now, we talk about some of the opportunities, but what does this look like practically? Jacqui, why don't we start with you?
So I think first and foremost, and we touched on it before, businesses really need to embrace technology. So, we are seeing an acceleration of digital transformation over the pandemic. And that effectively means that not adapting will result in being left behind. I think that's fairly obvious. There's been a lot of media attention on this. But building online communities as well. So getting involved in social media, hosting more online events, which, will arguably boost accessibility. Of course, Jens is touched on the training aspect, and having the ability to train online is making this globally more accessible. Embracing flexible working for sure is something that businesses will need to do. We've proven that it's worked over the last 15 months. So I think it's going to be tricky to argue that we shouldn't be moving ahead with that moving forward.
That's a very good point here. It also puts a lot of requirements on leaders to be more agile. Jan, I would love to hear your thoughts here. Also, maybe thinking about the processes of businesses. How do they really reposition here?
Well, yeah, so that's the internal element of the staff, but when we do, what we suggest actually, and we've done it a number of times, is sort of almost a full strategic review of the business, because assuming you can go back to business as usual and everything will be the same, however much some of the business owners and senior leaders would like that, it's folly, it's a missed opportunity as well, as we said. So the best companies we work with, that's maybe the wrong term we use, but some of the companies we do a full review. And when we really start to look at the strategies and where the organization is going from where it is today, it's everything that has to change. So just think through it. So it's, for example, the customers. So the customers, how have they changed? What's the interaction with the customer? What is maybe the customers' buying habits? And how does that affect what we now serve them? And it's simple things. So imagine you're a salesperson or a sales team, and you may not have spoken to the procurement manager because they've been furloughed for 15 months. Maybe they even left the organization. So some of those old connections and relationships they had with the business may literally be gone. So they now have to start, but they cannot go and knock on the door and shake hands. So they have to do it remotely. So and they don't know who it is. So it's simple things like that. You have the R&D department. They might be saying, well, hold on a second. Do the customers still want the same? Is it the same products? Does it need new features in the space we're in? And so in cash flow is another interesting one. It's a scary one at times, because it's not unusual that they're taking on big loans that now start to have to service soon, while they've had no income. So a number of business I work with, they have an enormous debt building up, literally losing money every month in the hope it soon will come. It will soon come. And it just keeps going on and on and on. And here, 18 months later, they have quite a debt burden. They have to figure out, how do we then grow again? Because remember with that debt burden, can they afford to rebuild stock? Can they afford to employ people again? And this is what I mean by the zombies. Early on, some of those business may literally not have the funding, and if they go out and try and get more funding in, will they actually get it, or will it be in good enough terms? So that's a full strategic review is literally the practical way of doing it. Go through everything you're doing, rethink.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying here is quite eye-opening, because it begs the question: how is, a broader question? How is economy really doing today? And what does this mean for the economy going forward? Which is, of course, not why we're here. We are here to get your wisdom how to help businesses adapt. So before I ask you that question, one thing that really stands out here is the loss of knowledge from the organizations that have lost people. How can the businesses harness this knowledge internally, either before they leave or after they have left? What can they do to regain that information so that they don't lose their competitive advantage or get new information?
Mm-hmm. Well, my take on that, that's even one more level. There's simple things like if people have been, with a lot of staff has been furloughed, imagine they have to now go back and operate heavy machinery. Do they have because of some industries, they will now need to redo their permits to operate it. All those muscle memory elements of how they did things may be gone. So there's a real health and safety element to this. You can take that into the office environment, all those relationships they had before that just made things work, even though it wasn't formal anywhere, but the person that would call if they had a question, the one that sort of shortcut some of the political issues within organization, they might be gone. So from that element, this is actually quite a complex area. Can we really restart and expect people to be productive? In terms of harnessing, yeah, if you lost people, I think in many organizations, if they have left, they haven't had the opportunity to harness that knowledge and keep it for the next. So they have to rebuild it in some cases.
Yeah. So if possible, get the information before they leave so you can hand over. And if not,
if you have the luxury, yes.
Amazing. So just in terms of time here, I want to ask you a question when it comes to how the leaders can adapt to a never-changing environment. We've already touched upon this a little bit, but just for you, Jacqui, any thoughts here before we go to the next section?
Yeah. So I think we've spoken about technology quite a lot, so we don't necessarily need to go down that route again. But I think for leaders, it's really important to really focus on how they communicate with their employees. So again, we're in a remote working world. Trust is going to be key, and that can only come if you have an open and honest and transparent relationship with your employees. So again, emotional intelligence is super important in this environment. Being vulnerable, I think, is also a very key element as well. As leaders, you need to make sure that you're clued up in terms of what's going on in individuals' home lives. We've got to remember that personal life and home life is no longer mutually exclusive anymore. So just bearing all of those things in mind, I think that's going to be really important to actually move forward into the new world that we're in. Because it is very much a grey area now. And for businesses who are going to be successful, then that's going to be part and parcel of strong leadership.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jacqui. Before we jump to the next section, we have a question from the audience. And again, if anyone else has questions, please do write them, and we will take them throughout as well in the event. Gunnar here is writing, are there any organizations who could help bridge the knowledge gap and so on? For example, he's mentioning here chambers of commerce, of course, they bridge these, they connect businesses here. But what are your thoughts here? What are ways that companies can get help from the outside to help adapt? Jan, any thoughts?
Well, yeah, so it's always good, of course, I come from that background, and to have somebody external to challenge the senior leadership team around their approach to re-emerging. So that's almost probably an obvious one. But if you think back also in internal sort of lost knowledge within the organization. It's actually not one I've heard a lot about, probably because of the furlough schemes we had. They have sort of held on to a lot of people. The reality, though, is once they restart, if within the next 6 months they're not up to full capacity, like some industries are not expecting to, then they will probably have to lay people off. And it's an interesting one, because I know we come on to talk about business owners and leaders. It's one of those dreaded things that I'm speaking to a lot of business owners about. It's almost like, oh no, I have to face into this in 2 or 3 months' time. And that's why I'll go to people like Jacqui, I'm sure, to get help both on the emotional side, but all in the whole legal aspect, because it could be quite significant numbers we're talking about here that people need to lay off. Hopefully it won't be. Hopefully the economy will pick up quickly, but there is going to be shifts, no doubt.
Amazing. There are so many things that I would love to dive into here, but due to time, we have to jump into the next question, and hopefully we can discuss this more in the Q&A. So going on to our next section here, Jan, you mentioned business leaders. Of course, you know, there are two elements here, also the employees, but let's start with the leaders. Because before you can take care of others, you need to take care of yourself as the primus motor behind the organization. You know, so having gone through everything that we have just discussed as a business leader, who, you know, also needs to be in a place where they're able to challenge other, in addition to running a business, and to take on this burden of being the one who drives the change. What can business leaders do in order to have the self-care that they need in order to re-energize themselves? Jan, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, that's something about probably taking a little step back and think a bit about what they're doing. The reason I'm saying this is I've actually experienced with a number of ones. You have the things you can expect almost from everyone in the organization, some level of anxiety. They might have had health issues as well themselves, or vulnerable people in their families, so therefore they have felt a lot of pressure and anxiety over this period. Some of them have had COVID, you know, and have been hospitalized and come out. They all have been part of that picture. But on top of that, there's a sense of responsibility, of course, for the organization, for people, for the business. And some of them, I think, are reevaluating is a better word, or should reevaluate, why am I actually doing this? So a number of them are speaking to are really fundamentally saying, do I want to continue run this business and the stress? Because think of an entrepreneur that started a business 20 years ago. Some of them are saying, I'm back to square one. I built up a good business with good steady income that built up my pension, and it sort of felt good. And now they're looking at big debts, maybe starting, if not from scratch, certainly a lot lower level, and have to rebuild. And they're saying, do I want to do that? And do I want to spend so many hours doing that? Is that what my life is about? So it's some really sort of introspection. But of course, out of that should hopefully come, yes, I want to do this. I'm passionate. I believe in this. This is what I want to do, because they need to go back in the business with to some sign of confidence. I'm not saying they shouldn't be vulnerable. That's a good thing. But they do need to project confidence that we can do this and have some level of clarity of where they want to take the business. So some good coach or support there is definitely helpful for just going through the thinking, have a good sounding board around that.
Yeah, so support is key here in order to be surrounded by people who lift you up, can give you perspective, and help you plan the route forward. Jacqui, I would love to hear your thoughts here. Do you have anything that comes to mind as we're discussing self-care for business leaders?
So, I mean, I echo a lot of what Jens has already talked about, but I think in terms of practical steps of what someone can do, again, you know, business leaders they're only human. They're susceptible to burnout just like anyone else. So I think it's really important to make some personal time, particularly now it's everyone feels like they're on a hamster wheel. They need to really try and get back to the position that they were in pre-pandemic. So just do things like make time for family, eat healthily, ask or go and ask for help, get a mentor, those sorts of things. Just have somebody else as a sounding board. I think talking is really key, but also, you know, get some physical exercise. go outside, get some fresh air. I think, the world is very much focused on well-being initiatives as well. And I think that really needs to be cascaded and trickled down from the top. Ultimately, if you're not taking care of yourself, then ultimately, are you necessarily going to be coming back to work fighting fit and then instilling those initiatives in the workplace? And this is what we want to see happen, really.
Mm.
I think it's also about just they shouldn't be so hard on themselves at times. They set themselves extreme expectations of what they're capable of, and sometimes they just have to say, actually, no, I can't do it all. And then it becomes about prioritizing the right things instead of trying to do everything to every man. I think it's a big part of this journey out of it.
Amazing. That is a great point that I will also take with me, because we put so much pressure on ourselves in order to be the best version and to be on it all the time. But the world has changed and we are only human. So how do we focus on the main important things and do the best we can with that? Another thing that I am meeting, speaking with companies, is that they're working 4 days instead of 5 days. So is this something you have met as well, Jacqui?
It is something that's being spoken about for sure. With the population of clients that we work with at Goodwill, there hasn't been necessarily such a take up on the 4-day versus 5-day working pattern. Obviously, they all have merits, but then of course we need to look at the type of businesses and what client base they're serving, and whether that really works in their business model, particularly if they're a smaller business. But certainly, it's certainly a big discussion, and it's a hot topic within the workplace at the moment.
Yes, and earlier on we discussed retraining. When it comes to harnessing knowledge. But what about retraining of the business leader themselves, Jan? What are you seeing here? And what are the options that they can do?
Well, it's an interesting one. It's because at the minute, I think just at this point in time, we've seen quite a surge in getting more leadership training, I would say. But my expectation that would be for any business that's now re-emerging, the focus is probably on the re-emerging first and foremost. That's just a lot of practical stuff. Mm-hmm. But of course, the better skilled they are in leading their business, the more focused they are, the better they are at getting the best out of their team, they're more likely they're going to be successful in their business. So that's a natural thing, of course, that the better equipped they are to lead their business, the better the business is likely to perform.
Amazing. That's a great point. So again, audience, if you have any questions, please do mention these in the chat. Before we jump to the next point, there's something that you have both kind of been alluding to. And I like that there is a little bit tension maybe here. Ooh. Because Jacqui, you are talking about be vulnerable, be honest. How are you feeling? And Jan, you're saying, well, you have to be confident. You have to be strong to lead. And of course, there's value and truth in both of them. So I would love to hear you kind of head to head. What are the benefits of being vulnerable versus keeping it together and being strong? Is there a time and place for either? Please, I would love to hear your thoughts here. And it's completely okay if you share different opinions. I would love to hear that. Jan, maybe we start with you and we go to Jacqui.
Right, okay, so start with me. So, no, I'm actually, being a coach, the vulnerability is actually a strength, but you have to use it as a strength. Standing in front of your audience, just say, sort of almost look like you're giving up, it's not going to be helpful. That's going to lose people's confidence in you. But admitting that you don't have all the answers, that's absolutely fine. So the old sort of maybe old-fashioned sort of dictatorial, if that's the right way of putting it, but where you had to somehow have all the answers and be seen to be completely in the know, that is not necessary anymore. But what is necessary, of course, is that you do project a level of confidence that we will succeed. And where you're not certain what the answers are, well, engage with your team and ask your team to contribute. They're likely to get you lots of good input, and the end result is likely to be better. Waiting to communicate what you're going to do until you have all the answers when there's so much uncertainty, that won't work. You're better off sharing, this is sort of where we're going, that's the direction. I don't have all the answers on the route there, but that's my vision for where we take the business. and then focus everybody's attention on getting to that point. That's the best approach. And then let everybody, empower them, engage them, give them the skills to make the good decisions they do day to day.
Amazing. So also freedom and giving your employees the opportunity to act within those boundaries and knowing that it can change. Jacqui, what are your thoughts here?
So yeah, I don't think that necessarily that Jens and I are opposite ends of the spectrum here. I think for sure it's a case of you know, we do need to be transparent, and of course it's always better if communication can be optimistic, but also optimistic but realistic, I think is the key here. You know, not to sort of be selling employees a lie and making things sound better and more rosy than they actually are. But I think vulnerability and emotional intelligence come hand in hand in my book. You know, it is really important for business leaders to be open, transparent, and vulnerable. You need to be able to share your weaknesses and struggles. You know, we are not perfect. We're not perfect human beings. And ultimately, that will just lead to better communication and trust, which absolutely is the foundation or the cornerstone of creating a productive and thriving environment. So that would be my perspective on that side.
Yes, a quote comes to mind, or something that people often discuss, which is actually a strength to be able to communicate where are we at this moment, not to sort of be in denial, but share, this is, you know, look the facts in the eye, not to be apathetic, but acknowledge it for what it is. And then, as Jens said, you do what you can from there to motivate and be cautiously optimistic. This is very exciting. Again, I will encourage the audience to ask questions. And in the meantime, we will jump to the fourth and not the complete last point, because then we have a Q&A. But we've also discussed a little bit the second part here. Now, you know, business leaders, we know how to motivate themselves, how to be strong, how to get the right support. And then it comes down to the people around them in their business, reigniting and motivating the staff and the team. So before we go into the solution here, what impact have the changes had on the working force? Practically, professionally, personally? We discussed this a little bit in the introduction, but this can of course impact productivity. So Jan, what does this look like right now? Where are we at in the state of the world when it comes to the workforce?
Well, interesting enough, I think again it's a very mixed picture. So I'm actually talking to quite a few organizations where they believe some of the their productivity has basically gone up. There's a lot of wasted things like traveling to meetings, sitting in long meetings, that has been reduced quite dramatically. So productivity has gone up. That's a positive, but then some areas like creativity, and where there's a really dynamic around being together as a team to create things, that hasn't always worked. New tools are coming up, collaborative tools, the Jamboards, Miro, and all those. They're definitely helping. It's a new way of doing it, but a mixed picture in terms of productivity. Okay. What I say is more consistent is more how people feel. And that is what I just noticed there's almost periods. So January, I remember really well that we came back from Christmas, and then we suddenly realized actually this lockdown is going to last a long, long time. It's not going to be over quickly. And you just felt the mood, almost whatever business I was in, it was like, oh no, and you sensed it. So we're starting to see these sort of the moods going up and down in the organization, and there's definitely a lot of anxiety about returning. Definitely. And that's something that the business leaders will need to deal with, and the individuals will need to deal with. What sort of new normal in terms of working relationships and coming into offices, it will be the new way of operating. And that probably is something I believe will shape itself over the next year or more, maybe several years.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Jacqui, this mood, oh no. Is this something that you have met, and how does this impact productivity in your eyes?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, I think, you know, people are getting there was a novelty, I think, to begin with of what was going on. And now where we've been in this situation for so long, you know, for sure, flexible working has its place. And I think for sure, it's largely a good thing that we've moved more into a balance of home working and maybe a bit of office working. But again, as we touched on earlier in this session, there is maybe not necessarily so clear a work-home divide anymore. People maybe are arguably working longer hours because they can't switch off, and there's not that sort of natural, okay, it's home time, I'm going to switch off my laptop and I'm going to go home from the office. So it could be a blessing for some, not for others. Also, of course, there are some parents who are still struggling with childcare and work. And that, that certainly has been a situation when, sadly, the schools and nurseries were closed over some of the pandemic. So that must have been a nightmare for some, and hopefully that will be over, and we will see a benefit of home working and not necessarily having the kids at your side moving forward. And I think also it's going to be interesting to see in this new working world if we develop a new host of micromanagers who maybe aren't necessarily so trusting in their employees, who they don't see and they're working from home. So will employees feel that they are being micromanaged? Are they in practice being micromanaged? Or will employees working more flexibly now feel that they're more empowered and trusted to work in this way? So I think that's going to be, we've still got to wait and see what happens with that in the long term. And then, of course, there's the good old Zoom fatigue, video calls. I, for one, have probably met my clients face-to-face virtually more now than ever before. Normally it would have been a phone call before. Now I actually get an opportunity to see my clients on the screen. And I think that's been really great for building professional relationships. On the flip side, because we are having probably more meetings than we did previously, there is just this draining feeling of, when do we actually get to do our work? Because we're just talking to people constantly. So I think there's, it's a fine balance. I think that's my point made.
No, that's great. That's very, very valid point. And I think we are all experiencing what you're saying in terms of having to prioritize in a new way. And so before we jump into this, what are some of the, I guess, one of the thoughts that I'm getting here, and it's to the next point as well, in terms of leaders being aware of the challenges that employees are faced with. If we can just tap into this a little bit, yes, Zoom fatigue being another thing, but what about the employees' pressures? What are they faced with now at home, now that they are there? Most will, of course, maybe already know a little bit about this because we're all in the same boat. But what can leaders do to better adapt to this changing home working situation? One thing is technical, but what about their leadership skill of their people? Jan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I fear a little bit the leadership gap might be increasing. By that I mean the expectations of the team compared to what the leaders are actually capable of. In an environment, and Jacqui absolutely nailed it, we have a real problem that most managers manage the input, as in people are sitting there 8 hours and doing stuff, and they can look over their shoulders that is still tapping away. We need to shift that over to that it's the output that matters. And if people have done it by 2 o'clock, they should go home. It's up to the manager, or go home, stay at home, or they could switch off. It's up to the leaders really to start to then get that discipline right, so they can fill up a staff members 37 hours in a way that's really productive. But it isn't about being there 37 hours. It's about producing the output that you would expect from a 37-hour week. And then, of course, stretching people while still being supportive. Because if you don't stretch people, they're not going to grow. Job is going to be uninteresting. So yeah, they need to find be good at this balancing, giving people tasks that's actually a little difficult while still being there to support them. I think the hybrid, if we get into that sort of environment where they'll be at home some days and at work some days, will probably be a better scenario than full-time home working and all on video, because you can start to have a different level of understanding. Just observing people sitting in a room gives you different input, where today, of course, we only see people when we're actually meeting. We don't observe people just sitting working by themselves. And that's a lost opportunity to see, what does it look like? Do they look happy or not? You're missing some of those input you would have in an office environment. So yeah, I fear actually that we will see expectations increase for what should a good leader do, and I'm not sure the leaders will step up quick enough.
Yeah, that's a great point. So just jumping to the next question here, when you're looking at employees who are really down, like again coming back to this feeling of heaviness, how can a leader then re-energize them, motivate their staff, and get them back on track, not just for the work, which of course needs to be done, but on a human level, so that they can get to a place where they can again take part and be able to do the task that's required ahead of them. Jacqui, any thoughts here?
So I think a lot of this is about the quality of communication. Is fundamental to this. So have a clear plan which is communicated to the business about working plans, future strategies, but getting the people themselves involved in company decisions is really important as well. You want your employees to feel like they have a voice and that they're engaged. So keeping an open line of communication. I mentioned earlier about being, about communication being optimistic but realistic. So I just think that we need to be open and transparent about, communicating future plans in that case. But then also making sure that employees understand the why, they understand about the bigger goals of the company and how their work fits into that and why their work is so important. We need to give our employees a sense of purpose, and with purpose comes engagement, and I think that's really, really important. But then also, again, we're hearing all of this noise about well-being as well. So I think we just need to make sure that now is more important than ever when we're not seeing people so often. We're not noticing, obviously, if they come into the office, you can kind of see the signs of physical stress. We're not seeing that anymore because, you'll have an hour's phone call with someone and they can put on a face and you won't actually recognize that someone needs some help. So I think now well-being and encouraging rest is really important as well to make sure that your employees are bringing their best selves to the workplace.
Yeah, I would also add to that, Jacqui, you're absolutely right. There's something that's really important. I would probably almost put it, this is the answer to your question. If I'm sort of really, really specific, what should a leader do? They should have great one-to-one conversations, really quality conversations. And that means they have to take the time in a busy environment to really sit down and have a quality conversation. And that's not the operation that tells people what to do or saying, have you done what you're supposed to? That's a question that's much more in the coaching space where the leader takes a coaching approach. So what's on your mind? What are your challenges at the minute? What are you doing to deal with that? How are you balancing work life and company? What are your thoughts around how you would like to return? And start to really engage in a trusting way with the team members. But that's a one-to-one conversation because every team member will be different. So it won't be just a general, we will all do this in the future. Each member needs to know that they're valued, they're appreciated, and they're being heard by their team leader. That actually, I believe, is the absolute key to the well-being, to the performance, to people starting to engage in a new way in this new world.
Yeah. And I think also as well, rather than, leaders or managers are always so quick to point out when someone's done something wrong, we all need to remember to point out when someone's done something right as well and say thank you. It's just such a simple thing, but it makes a huge difference.
Yes, I really like that. This is hugely important and some really great points you have. And we actually have a question here from Gunnar in the audience. And this is something that also, I'm starting to think about here. We're looking at, Gunnar is asking, will these adjustments or changes require adjustment to the education system when it comes to preparing the next cohort of employees to be more independent working? However, also to Gunnar's question, he asks here about, is this more sector specific, and maybe IT could be an option. But my question in addition to Gunnar is, but what about the leader? Because you see leaders who are maybe technically incredibly capable, but like Jacqui mentioned earlier, what about the soft skills here? Are we looking for technical leaders, team leaders that can have a role split? So a little bit of a dual question. I would, of course, like to start with Gunnar's. What's the adjustment to the education system here to prepare employees and then the employer? Jan, over to you.
Well, I actually think, interesting enough, that I would say on the whole, the education system is probably getting that element right. I'm finding young millennials and the Generation Z are really quite independent thinkers. And we see from research, when they're looking at what employer are they looking for, they're looking for employers who don't tell them what to do, employers who take a coaching and mentoring approach, and an employer that offers them lots of development and growth opportunities. So I think in some respects, I'm sure there's all sorts of elements of the education system that could be better, so they're better prepared for certain skill levels and certain attitudes. But on that element particularly, no, actually, I think that's fine. But the leaders are not ready for it. And they like to, I think that even if you look at the lots of management education, looking at people as human resources, just that name just shows how we think about humans in this space. We need to shift that. And that means different skills here for the team lead, as you say. It's not the technical. Once you lead people, you might have some bias in the technical ability, but just because you're the best technical person does not make you the best leader of the team around you. Often actually it's the opposite, because the great technical person is the person who's probably focused on that. That's where they get their joy, where you want leaders who enjoy growing the team, giving them opportunities and not taking the glory away from them, that type of thing.
Amazing. And what about the structural change here? Because we're actually talking about structural changes, not in all companies, but I guess for some, right? Because the focus has been different. If you're now starting to look about the self-care or the care of the employees. Jacqui, do you have any thoughts here? Are you seeing changes?
I think I'm seeing changes where changes is required, but not necessarily being implemented. I think I would probably echo what Jan is saying in terms of actually we don't have skilled leaders necessarily. So I think we actually need to have more training sessions on how to actually do line manager training, how to manage a team, how to be more emotionally intelligent, resilience training, all of those sorts of things. They're not happening necessarily, and I think that a lot of businesses, they see it as something that's a nice to have, not something that's an essential. And I think that mindset needs to shift from the top before we're actually going to see any fundamental meaningful change.
Yeah, and how do you facilitate this communication between existing employees and employers in a constructive way? Jen, do you have any thoughts here?
I'm not quite sure what you meant by the question there. How's that be, Sophie?
Well, I think, what Jacqui is alluding to here is the training, is, the trying to understand each other better, trying to understand the need of the employees better from a leader. And of course, there's a lot that both parties can gain from each other if you have the trust to speak together. So is that something that you encourage? Do you think that's needed in a good idea?
Well, absolutely. Of course it is. I was almost inevitable, but what I would probably add to that is, but it does require the leader to listen and really pick up what are they actually telling me and what do I therefore need to do differently. And then out of that might come, I need training, I need new skills I don't have today. Some of it might still be there. They just need to, it's almost the really basic skills of listening and asking questions that is helpful, rather than probably what most leaders are trained in and come through the education system from universities. That's all about problem solving. That's all about fixing stuff. Whereas when you're talking leadership, and what I'm looking at here is, how do you help other people fix stuff? How do you help the team feel that they have the confidence and the abilities to solve the problems that they're facing? That's a very different skill set. That's about understanding, how do adults learn? How do you give people confidence? And that's a very different skill set from what most managers and leaders have brought with them. No university teaches these things. That's one of the dramatic. So back to Gunnar's question, that's probably the one thing we need to change. It's not so much the staff member as they enter, but it is that some of these staff members, the engineers of that's being educated today, will be leaders in the future. Universities, in terms of by the time they get to be engineers or advisors or whatever in their field, rarely gets much training about how to actually have conversations with other humans. It's just not in the curriculum.
Yeah, and how to actually develop coaching skills. I think that's rather than it being the responsibility of a handful of key people in the organisation, these skills really should be the skill set of the line managers and the teams that they actually manage.
That's a great point. Exactly, it becomes about the employee, and the listening becomes about them and how to support them. But of course, the leaders need to be in a good place as well to be able to receive that, which is what we have discussed. Amazing. Some really, truly insightful and good points here. I'm mindful that we have 5 minutes left. So audience, do you have any questions? Please write them in the chat. Is there anything that stood out to you that you would like to acknowledge? Do let us know. Any good takeaways? I'll leave it for a few minutes while I just summarize here. And then if not, any final comments from you, and then we shall wrap up. So today, we have had really, really great insight from Jen and Jacqui, looking at the overall business environment, the changes, the hibernation, and reigniting your business. Looking at what does that mean practically speaking for a business, and all of that practical takeaway and advice that you can do as a business leader in order to adapt to this new changing environment. Looking at what business leaders truly need in order to get back in the game, mentally and practically speaking, and how then they should listen to get the insight and ideas from their employees, as well as, of course, being confident, vulnerable, cautiously optimistic, as you said, Jacqui, in order to set the goals for the future and motivate the staff. I really like your point, Jacqui, that when you engage with your staff, they get ownership and they feel a sense of purpose. And this reminds me of the man asked with the first rocket to the moon, who was a janitor, what is your job? And he said, I am helping put a man on the moon. So it's that sense of purpose that will, get the motivation back in your team, and that you're part of something greater. So far, we don't have any questions. So before we wrap up, I just want to say thank you and hear if you have any final comments or points.
Well, I'll just add, I think, Sophie, that actually on the whole, there's really a lot of optimism around. I think we're starting to believe we will come out of this. There'll probably be some stumbles over the next year, but what's happened actually through the pandemic, in spite of all the suffering and all the horrible things that's happened, some things are accelerated that probably should have happened a long time ago, as in flexible working, new way of engaging with employees, climate change, and there's a number of things you can argue that has been now accelerated. So let's take some real positives away from that, and hopefully we'll actually see a better work environment and new businesses emerge. That could be really exciting.
Absolutely. Jacqui, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think I would echo Jan's thoughts there. I think ultimately the working world has accelerated to a point where, maybe we are working in a more beneficial way overall for employees. Hopefully we're going to get to a more balanced point where we have a better work-life balance. Life's going to be better for everyone. So let's see what happens moving forward. But ultimately businesses need to remember that they need to reinvent their businesses, or they're going to be left behind. Yeah. So I think that is a major take home in terms of just making sure that you've got the tech in place, I think, if you haven't already.
Yeah, and the key thing, as you mentioned, both of you, is communication and listening, and a leadership here. Thank you so much. This has been really, really insightful. Thank you to the wonderful speakers for taking the time to answer our questions. Thank you to the DK-UK team in the background. We have Diane, Gunnar, and Helena, who have set this up. Thank you for the opportunity to moderate today, and thank you, of course, to the Finnish and British Chamber of Commerce as well, who is co-signer on this event. Of course, I'm a part of the DK-UK and the Young Professionals. We have events coming up throughout the summer and fall. For the young professionals up to 36, do get in touch so that we can, if you want to be a part and figure out and find out what we are doing in terms of professional social networks, and the same with the chambers of commerce. If you want to be or get involved either as a member or in our events, feel free to reach out to us via the websites and the contact boxes there or on LinkedIn. Once again, thank you, Jacqui and Gunnar from Quiver and Goodwill. It's been a pleasure, and I want to just wish you an amazing day, and thank you to all the participants who were here today as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.